you were, how did this diagnosis like happen? You know, you're diagnosed with a disability. This was just something that like suddenly happened, or it just gradually came into being?
No, it was very sudden. I uh, I drove heavy equipment for a living, bulldozers, motor graders, loaders. I plowed snow. I live in the Rocky Mountains, so I'm a snowplow driver. I was, and I very blue collar, and I worked very hard to provide for my family. And on the side, I was a musician. I played in bar bands since high school. So, as I grow older, I was still playing music at night and stuff like that. But one day in 2012, my ear just started ringing. My left ear just started ringing, and it was insanity. I was like, what's going on? I've been to concerts, I've been a musician, so I know what it's like to have your ear ring. But this was a whole new level where it was just devastatingly distracting. So that happened for about a year, and the ringing never went away. And in that year, I visited my general physician, and he couldn't diagnose me, gave me the number for an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I went and saw him. He's like, well, you have severe tinnitus, which is ringing in your ear. And I was like, okay, well, what do we do to fix it? And he's like, you can't fix it. And that's when I first started getting worried. So when that happened, I just had to work around it, and it was so distracting. The problem was a year after that, I started getting the symptoms for my real disability, which was I started getting vertigo attacks and constant dizziness and constant nausea, balance issues, hypercosis, which is sensitivity to sound, sensitivity to light. I was exhausted all the time. I had insomnia. Barometric drops when storms came through the mountains would make my ears hurt. And I was like, okay, something more is going on than just a ringing in the ear. After seeing 9 specialists over 3 years, I was diagnosed with Meniere's disease, which is a vestibular disorder that's a disability. And that's my story in a nutshell. So it took 3 years to get a diagnosis. And when I got my diagnosis, I was like, how could my one ear affect my life so bad and just wreck my life? And that meant my relationships. It meant how I looked at myself. I worked for 5 years, very, very sick with dizzy, nausea, getting vertigo attacks, blurred vision, my spatial neck recognition, I lost it. And it became very, very, very serious. And then I started really worrying. After my 9th specialist, my 10th specialist, 3 years later in 2015 said, well, you definitely have Meniere's disease, which is a disability. And it was hard for me to wrap my head around. Like I couldn't believe that I was so sick that I had a disability. It didn't make sense. I was healthy, providing for my family, loving sports, loving music, loving wrestling with my son, throwing ball with my son, and that all disappeared in a matter of a couple years. And I found myself stuck in bed, not even I couldn't do anything. And it was very difficult, very difficult.
What were some of the things that helped you move through that? Like, not necessarily like, I know that Tim has this beautiful idea of unfixed, like, right? People with disabilities or chronic conditions, there's nothing we can improve and grow and learn, but we're unfixed. There's nothing that's ever going to quote unquote fix us, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
but in that experience, like, what were some of the things that you did or thought about or that were helpful to help move you forward?
It took years. I worked for about 5 years with my disability till I could no longer work. And I was getting sicker and sicker. And when you have a vertigo attack, when you're plowing snow in the mountains, that's not a good thing. You're incapacitated for 8 to 24 hours. This was happening more and more regularly. So I lost my job that paid my bills and ended up having to take other jobs that paid less money, but I still wanted to do what I could to keep moving forward until it got to the point where my specialist who takes care of me now was just like, your quality of life is zero if you keep working, because all your energy is going to go into that and you'll have no quality of life outside of that. So it was humiliating. It was embarrassing, but I had to go on to disability, which was just, it was a kick in the gut. It was just rough. That being said, the tough part was grieving the loss of all those things. I lost sports. My balance is so bad, I can't kick a soccer ball anymore. I can't throw a baseball. I can't run. I can't jog. Music, I lost that because I lost all the hearing in my left ear and the ringing in my ear. I couldn't hear music correct. So I lost that. I lost riding motorcycles because it became too dangerous to ride a motorcycle when you have no balance. And so all the things that I loved were just disappeared within a year or two. And so the process I had to work through was grieving all those losses. I had to actually grieve, like I lost a loved one. I had to grieve the fact that I can't play music anymore. I had to quit my bands. I had to quit playing music, and I haven't played music in 8 years now. You know, I can't play sports anymore. I watch sports a lot, but I can't play them anymore. And I had to grieve that. I had to grieve all these losses that my disability stole from me. And so a lot of emotional stuff comes in at that point. You know, I was anxious. I was stressed. I had tons of guilt because I wasn't the same husband I was 3 years ago to my wife, and I wasn't the same dad, and it was heartbreaking. And so I think coming back from the emotional stuff was the big battle. You know, I had to learn how to manage my physical stuff, and eventually I did, but I still have leftover stuff with the emotional impact of how this has affected my life. You know, my self-esteem dropped. I felt worthless. I felt, you know, like I said, guilt was a huge issue. Guilt, you know, that I can't be the person that I thought I was going to be and what people expected me to be. And I started letting people down because I couldn't do things. And so I had to get over that guilt. And so it was like the grieving process. You go through anger, you go through disappointment, you go through frustration until you get to the point where you come to acceptance, and then you come to forgiveness. And I had to forgive myself. And once I got to that point, then I could start rebuilding in a positive way. But it took years. It took 8 years to go from point A to point B.
Yeah, that's a long journey.